I'm going to go over 14 stocks that I talked about on Tuesday, December 12th. I'm going to show you whether we close the gaps to the upside and to the downside as of Friday, December 15th. First up is Oracle. We ended the week at 103.32, up 3%. When I talked about it here at the end of the day, that's Tuesday, this line is the beginning of the day. So we ended at $100.87. I pointed out this gap starting at 104.89, closes out at 114.90. This gap did not close out. I will extend it right to this line. And we are a ways off, actually. We are not in this channel right here, but we just are barely just getting into it. If the price continues to slowly go up, we should hit this Monday or Tuesday of next week. But if we go to the south side, we could go down all the way to roughly 98.19. And if we get down to here, I will anticipate a bounce to the upside. Meantime, this gap opened up on the 14th on Thursday, and it gapped down. So I anticipate a gap up, and it closed on Friday at 102.90. Note the bounce at support and support, sell off at resistance, near resistance, and in this area as well. Check the RSI and the MACD. The next one is JCI, Johnson Controls. We ended the week at $52.44, down 3%. When I talked about this stock, price was at $53.19. This is the gap that I was mentioning. To the upside, 55.25, closes out at 56.60. We just barely kissed it, but we did not close it out. I will extend it to Friday, and we're getting into the channel, but closing out, it could take a few more days, maybe in the middle of the week, because we are all the way down here. But we are getting near support, so I anticipate this thing to be bought up. The 1-year price target is 64.74, a 23% return from where we are, so plenty of upside. This gap also opened up on the 14th, closed out at 53.75, and then we fell down. So there's another gap to the upside that closes out at 54.03. I will be keeping track of this gap. The next one is EBIX. I've traded this one multiple times in the past. We ended the week at 493, down more than 7%. When I talked about it on Tuesday, this was where price ended in the evening. I pointed out this gap, which did close out at $4.97. It opened up at roughly 488. And this down here is support, bounced all the way up, sold off at resistance. And remember, anytime we pass this line, I will anticipate a sell-off as people take their profits and they run. And what else do I have marked? All right, I marked out this one as well. This opened up on Wednesday, closed out on also Wednesday evening. So we gapped down, and then we fell some more, bounced up on support, and then closed this out. And now we have a gap here that formed on Thursday as well. It gapped up, so I anticipate gapping down to fill, and that will happen at $487 and $465. Looking back, I purchased some shares at this price, on this transaction. I closed out at a 29% return. On this transaction, I sold out at a 12% return, and I did a couple more trades in the past as well. and I sold some up here. And I do have some, I think, still at this price, or maybe I sold it off already. No, I do still have some that I bought at $7.25 when the stock was running. So I do anticipate it to go back. So I'm not worried about that. But the 1 year price target is $5 from where we are. So only a 1% return. But I do trade this one just because I'm comfortable with EBIX. Check out the fundamentals too if you are trying to invest in this stock. It took a beating. The next one is mRNA. We ended the week at 86.01. When I talked about it, we were at 78.04. This is the gap I was tracking, and we did close it. Right here. So this gap is no longer in play. And this gap opened up as well. Gap down, I anticipated a gap up, and we closed out right here at 77.90. There's also a gap to the downside that we need to close out now, and that formed on Thursday. So it starts at 85.29, closes out at nearly -3 standard deviations at 78.74. If we hit this level, I will anticipate a bounce. The next one is Enphase. This is when I talked about it right here. This gap to the upside at 103 closed out. Then another gap formed on Wednesday. Closed out on Wednesday as well at 99.06, and we were off to the races there. And now we have another gap to track. I will mark out, turn on my magnet. This gap will begin. Oh, let me turn off the magnet. This will close out at 107.93. So if you'd like to play to the south side and short the stock, I will anticipate this to close at some point. The 1 year price target we have already met at 113.83. But right now we are in a upward channel here. The next one is Oxy. We closed that gap right here at 57.05 that I mentioned. So this gap is no longer in play. Meantime, we formed another gap here to right there. So I will anticipate this gap to close at 57.26. It formed at roughly 58.77. So we gapped up. I anticipate a gap down. We tickled it through here, but did not flush to the south side. So there is some room to head south on this stock. At again, we ended at 58.56. The middle of the trend takes us to 59.39. And I will anticipate price, if we make it to 2 standard deviations, which is $61, to then fall down as people take their profits. The next one is DVN. We ended the week at 44.87. The 1 year price target, 56.89. All right, I talked about this stock right here, pointed out this gap, and I will clean it up. We closed it to the upside at 44.22. So this gap is no longer in play. And note the bounce at support, sell-off at resistance, consolidation, back at the middle of the trend, and then south. Now, we have a tiny, teeny gap here, but I don't really track those. By playing -2 and 2 standard deviations, this will automatically close out. So I am done with Devon Energy. CTVA. We ended the week at 46.55. The 1-year price target, 58.53, a 25% from a return from where we are. So when I pointed this out, the lower gap to the upside formed at 45.51, and then to the north side, that closes that out, 45.58. We closed it out. Let me clean this up. We closed it right here. This gap is no longer in play. Easy money there. And this gap formed. We gapped up. What happens when we gap up? I anticipate a gap down to fill. Turn on my magnet so I can get a better reading here for price. And this opened up right here on the 14th. And there. So that is the gap I will anticipate. Turn off my magnet because that gets wonky. It wants to go to a different level. So you have to take that off. Closes out at 45.53. So to the downside there. And if we hit this area, because we are at support down here, I will anticipate a bounce. But I would definitely let this one close out. We are close. VLO, Valero Energy. We ended the week at 128.57, down nearly 0.5%. The 1-year price target, 150, a 17% return from where we are. Now, a couple of things here. This is where I tracked the gap. This one closed to the upside at 123.29. This one that I mentioned at 124.56 closes out at 125.53, did close out. Let me clean this up. I just extend it out and then I go back and tidy up the chart. So we closed right here to the upside. So this gap is no longer in play. And another gap formed when we ripped up. Turn on my magnet. Sometimes I have to. Let me move this so I can see first, and then I will fix that. Here to here. And this gap touched to the upside right there. And we gapped up, so I anticipate a gap down. And the gap down starts at, remove my magnet, 126.24 roughly, and 124.84. Again, if we hit this area, this target area, to close out this gap, I will anticipate a bounce. So if you're playing very conservatively, you can play to this middle of the line and get out, or take it to eventually 2 standard deviations. All day long, price stays within this range. And if it goes outside, that's a sell signal to get out because it will not stay at that price without consolidating for a next leg up or a leg down. Check the RSI and the MACD, and that way you can kind of see where price could be heading and whatever indicators that you like to use. The next one is Charter. Communications, 379.93 is where we ended, down more than 1%. The 1-year price target, 453.12. This changes all the time, so keep your eyes on that. Don't forget to put a stop on your price so that in case it falls apart, you don't lose too much money if it goes in the opposite direction of where you think it's going. All right, I talked about this gap to the downside, and we It gets a little ugly here. Closed out right there. So we closed to the downside. So this gap is no longer in play. This is done. So we went sideways, went down. Another gap got created to the gap up, which means we go down, and it closed out. And we touched right there. Roughly 379. It's actually right about there. And then this tiny gap, but again, I'm not going to track that. That's too small for me to waste my time, but it's going to close if we go up to 2 standard deviations. Note the upward channel on the 5-minute time frame. CI, we ended the week at 290.50, down 2.7%. The 1-year price target, 348, which represents a 20% increase. This one, when I talked about it, had a gap to the south side. It was right here. I just kept extending it out as I looked at it, so that's what I do sometimes. But this is where I looked at it, and it has not touched. So we've got a gap that takes us all the way down to 258.96. The channel is going down, though. This is where I talked about it. It was at 296, fell down to support here. And what happens at support? Bounced up back to the middle of the trend. I always anticipate price to get back to the middle of the trend, grinding along here before making its way to the north side at 2 or -2 standard deviations. Note the gap that also formed right here. Turn on my magnet. It gapped down, so I will anticipate a gap up. It touched right there. We are closed and done. And that closed out at roughly 296.71. This gap here, gap down. And I will mark that one because it's a little bit bigger, I should say, than a few other ones. I do like to look for gaps to the upside, but if you like to go short, look for gaps to the downside. But I like to let you be aware of the potential on the way down. All right, so this will close out at roughly 298. There, you can look forward to that, but this gap to the downside, beware, 258.96. Not even close, not in that channel yet, but we are on our way, it looks like, sloping down. The next one is Airbnb, 146.60, down nearly 0.5%. We've already met the 1-year price target. If you want to know the next leg up, just go to tipranks.com and look at the high forecast. When I talked about this stock on the 12th, this finished the gap up here. Let me move this so you can see. So we gap down. I anticipate a gap up to close it out. We touched it right there at 142.93. Went up, tried to hit support, or resistance. Couldn't quite get there. Sometimes we don't, and this is close enough. Fell back down. Tried to get down to support here. Didn't make it up, but ripped to the north side and then created this gap. So I will anticipate this to go down on Monday because we are pretty close to that level, right? We gapped up, so I will anticipate going down. So I'm going to turn that red. So visually, when I just glance very quickly at my chart, I can kind of see the direction that we could be heading. And I pointed out this gap for Airbnb because I've traded this in the past. This closes out at 133.71. We are not in that channel, not in that zone, but something to be aware of. We are in an upward channel right now on the 5-minute. Obviously, flip to the different time frames to get different buy and sell signals, especially if you're trying to invest. All right, the next one is Exxon. $100.90 is where we ended, down more than 0.5%. The 1-year price target, 126.53. When I talked about this stock on the 12th at the end of the day, which would be right there, we filled the gap on the 14th. I marked this out already because I recapped it in a different video, but I just want to show it to you again. So that is done, no longer in play. This is down closer to support, a bounce up, sell off at resistance, back to the middle of the trend. We created a gap. We will close this gap on Monday, easy peasy. You want to mark that out because that would just take us to right here. We're so close. Of course, we're going to get there because we will eventually touch this 101.72, this target. All right, the next one and last one is FIS. We ended the week at 59.41, down more than 1.5%. The 1-year price target, 64.83, a 9% return from where we are. So I talked about this gap right here, starting at 57.18, closing out at 56.96 to the downside. We have not closed this out. And right now we are in an upward channel, but this gap was created on Thursday. We gapped up, so I anticipated a gap down. It closed out right here. Change that to red so I can tell visually again very quickly whether we gapped up or down. My chart gets very messy sometimes, and so this is just a nice visual cue. And then ignore these lines. That's previous support and resistance that I've tracked. I should delete it. I will at one point. But that does it for me. I will keep tracking a couple of the stocks to the upside that have not closed their gap. And I will do that and come out with a video on Sunday night for the week. All right, if there is a stock that you would like me to take a look at, please let me know. Thanks for watching.